Hi all, I have another very fun game of Leela to show you today. Fritz 16.10 was playing against Leela in the Chess.com Blitz Cup 2018. E4, and Leela thankfully is a fan of the Sicilian defence, so one of the most exciting openings you can play against 1e4. I absolutely love the Sicilian defence generally. We have knight f3, d6, and Fritz is not afraid to go into the open Sicilian, so opening up the position a bit. And this is the Najdorf, the classic Najdorf high class waiting move a6, an upgrade on normal Scheveningen, by the way. e6, it stops bishop b5 ideas, it's got a lot of perks, it dissuades the Keres attack. So a6, bishop e2. We have now, after bishop e2, e5. Leela is not too afraid of this d5 square. It can be a structural liability. Often there is a battle which revolves around that critical central square. Knight b3, bishop e7, queen d3. This is very interesting. In normal chess-based lightbook, it seems castling, just simply castling with bishop e3, and this position with the queen going to d2 is more normal looking, and a4 to dissuade b5. This is a very normal looking classical Sicilian defence position, and it's thought to be about equal. You can see that white's pieces are quite harmoniously placed here. But queen d3, yes, very interesting instead. We have black castling. This has been seen before in high level games. So bishop d2 now, knight bd7. And now white plays knight d5. So that kind of fixes the hole though. The d5 hole is fixed at the expense of giving up the light square bishop. Is it worth it to give up this light square bishop to fix that? E takes, rook c8. c4, you'll note also white does have a majority of pawns on the queen side now. So potentially there's a pawn majority to be used. But black on this side of the board, if we split the board in half, yeah, you can see on this side black has got now 4-3 pawn majority to push. So it's interesting structurally, will Leela emphasize that she has the pawn majority on this side of the board or not? b6, and we have bishop c3 here. There was an ICCF email correspondence game with rook ae1, which was intriguing actually. Intriguing because if you look at white's play, it goes crazy after g4, and white eventually though won this. It's very, very attacking chess from white in this correspondence style game. So that was an alternative, rook ae1. But here we see bishop c3 from Fritz, rook e8, h3, bishop f8, rook ac1, g6. And this does give the idea that Leela is indeed going to be playing on her queenside pawn majority. Her trump card out of this opening is maybe to get these pawns going a bit. We see bishop d2, bishop g7, rook fe1, a5, and it's nice how the dark squares are kind of marked out. There's a lock on the dark squares, and there isn't a strategic pawn break that's obvious for white here now. Bishop e3, we have king h8, bishop g5. This looks a little bit like a wasteful move, because after h6 there's really no point in taking on f6. That would just strengthen black on the dark squares. This position, black would even have a small edge. The bishop might even later go to h6. So actually it was more of a teasing move to tease a weakness, it seems. Knight h7. Leela is getting ready just structurally to aim for f5 and then maybe e4, which liberates the bishop on the diagonal. But there's also other possibilities as well from that. Knight d2, f5. So the more energetic pawn play is being revealed here from black. g3. This does soften white a bit on the king side. Rook f8. There isn't a real threat of f4 here. You might feel that this rook is really propelling f4. In fact, white just plays king g2 and just says, what have you got? Leela actually replies with h5. On f4 it doesn't really matter because there's a just in time taking a square now there's a weakness here of the d4 square. White can actually play bishop d4, perfectly satisfactory position, even position. So actually, yeah, we see h5 keeping the tension. f3 to be able to answer h4 with g4. That's kind of clever in its own right. Defensively, h4, g4, and it does seem pretty solid. However, if you look, these pawns are all on light squares, and imagine this bishop, which is controlling these dark squares, was swapped off for this bishop. Wouldn't white then be weaker on the corresponding dark squares here? So is that actually going to be the subject of Leela's next positional plan here? If white had, by the way, tried to grab a pawn, there's really no point in doing this at all. Knight c5 might actually be the most accurate move first, and then if white takes, there's no way of saving that pawn. There's check and then taking here. Black's going to have a big advantage, so there's no point at all in doing that. That's the intention. The downside, as I mentioned, though, is these dark squares. We have knight c5. White wants to preserve that dark square bishop. And now bishop f6, really clever positional stuff. Try and swap off with this bishop to weaken these dark squares. We see g takes, king h2, bishop g5 is in time, f4, and this does though fracture, it seems. We had the nice duo of pawns. It had to be factor in. We're going from a duo to an isolated looking pawn, and also an isolated looking pawn over here. So this is extremely finessed positional judgment, because usually in general we don't want to isolate our pawns. So what is Leela actually getting here by doing this? Off the takes, we have check. So now Leela actually she has to can't go into a pin here, because that g-file is actually quite dangerous. So interposing the queen, offering the queen trade. Okay, knight f3. So what has black actually got here? Rook e8. Okay, you might think, well, this pawn is a bit vulnerable, isn't it? It isn't actually taken here. We see rook c2. It's far too dangerous to actually take this pawn because of knight g5. This would actually stop the knight going back now. For example, let's say knight f3, then bang, rook takes e2 check, and taking here, big advantage. And that's just so awkward here. If bishop f3, then there's rook h6 on the cards. So maybe rook g8 first, though, is even stronger, and then just rook h8 crushing. So yeah, that pawn, that cannot be taken. That's a poison pawn, so it's ignored. Rook c2. But then we have this infiltration on the dark square. So even though the dark square bishop's gone, even though black structure has been diced a bit, Leela has got diced pawns, let's be objective, but the infiltration on dark squares is quite high here. Rook f1, knight e4, as if the knight is interested in going to g3. It looks like quite a menacing knight. From g3 it'll be hitting quite a lot. Knight g1, and now things get really clever here. Black to play. What do you think Leela played in this position if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video? Okay, it's time for a positional pawn sack. f3 is played. Yeah, on knight g3, if we played knight g3 here, actually this is also not that bad. So it's a testament. White's actually in a difficult situation. Black's got a great position. This isn't that bad. h4 is maintained via this move, and if the rook has to go back, then actually black is still in the driving seat. There's still a dangerous pawn here now to get up the board, so it's really kind of a tricky position. And you'll note that anytime a knight would have taken, there's always rook takes and a knight takes. So this is a dangerous scenario for white in any case. But here anyway, after f3, the pawn is actually just this pawn is sacrificed instead of knight g3. So knight takes f3 was played. There's three different ways to take here. So at this critical juncture, if we look at bishop takes, then knight g3, for example, and the other knight coming in is a lot of fun with f4. So similar scenarios, we've got this f-pawn mobility, which actually means quite a lot here. For example, this position is very bad indeed because of check there, and if the king went into the corner, then there's rook g6, and then rook g1. It's absolutely crushing stuff. Checkmate. So bishop takes f3 doesn't seem to bode too well. Rook takes f3, there's f4. For example, this is good with rook f2 as an intermediary tactic because of this unfortunate f1 queening business. This is absolutely winning a piece there and winning. So yeah, and if we look at that line again, just to give something more sensible instead of rook takes, activating this rook, something a little bit more sensible here, bishop d3. Again, this other knight comes in with a vengeance. And this scenario, again with that dangerous f-pawn, is too much for white to bear here. Pawn's crashing through. So we have knight takes as the sort of lesser evil move. This knight comes in. We have bishop d1. Why didn't white take on g5? Let's have a look. Knight takes bishop g4, exploiting that pinned pawn. But it can actually be taken. This scenario, just this as an example, is great for black. The exchange sack is brilliant here. Black actually gets a really good position out of that with the two connected passed pawns. You'll note that white's pawns are still locked down. Any strategic break is locked down on this side of the board. Leela's like the master of pawn breaks. She's shut down the queen side and all this. So anyway, so knight g5, knight takes g5 doesn't really do too much. If we look at this position again, what is white actually doing here? There's f4, f3 on the way and stuff like that. And h3 is also being targeted, which is probably why that's, you know, the engine's top choice actually to protect this pawn as well. So actually bishop d1 was played, so keeping a shield on this h3 pawn for the moment. King g7, rook g2. We have knight g3, rook f2, knight takes. So transitioning into a very nice looking endgame. This is great positional judgment here. This looks like a delicious endgame for black to have. If you look, the king is very mobile. It can start getting into the white position, potentially with devastating effect. The knight is controlling key squares, even where it is at the moment. We have rook f2, king f6, bishop g2, and the king comes in really aggressively. So we're just equal on pawns, but white may be actually positionally losing this already by force with best play. Rook c7, we have this check. So white threw in this check in instead of just protecting the pawn here. You might think, why not just protect the pawn? And it does give black seemingly lucrative options to throw in this check of king f4 and d4. In fact, king f4 is perfectly nice, even if rook e6 is allowed. This is a perfectly nice scenario for black. You can see great coordination of black's pieces and a winning endgame there. But anyway, the check was thrown in, and knight e4 is actually probably even stronger than stepping the king in here. Let's see, b3, what happens here now? Why is this stronger? Rook g7. Well, the support now, the knight has vacated that g3 square, of course, and that can be used as a pivot square to bring the rook in to the game. So very interesting square from the black perspective now. King g1, but actually rook g5 for a moment, and it's now teasing a little bit. Now rook g3. Now if white takes, then this is just a really juicy scenario with the black king being super aggressive. The white pawn's going nowhere and actually being picked up there. But what does white actually do here? There's f4 and f3 just supported by this knight on the cards, if nothing else. That looks absolutely devastating. So we have rook e2, and the rook swings into white's position. So bridge building as well, I mean, if needed. But yeah, the rook is just given access to the 7th rank. This is absolutely delightful. There's no real counterplay for white in this position. White's totally passive, and black has the one important mobile pawn, now threatening to exploit that pinned bishop with f3. The king steps out of the way at least to stop f3 for the moment. The f3 idea is renewed with knight g5. Supports check, and now the king steps in really aggressively. Capablanca would be proud here. King's super aggressive, and Steinitz, who said the king is a great fighting piece. And here we see these variations that the king is assisting the powerful f3. And this is devastation now for white. Bishop f1 was played. Yeah, the bishop's clinging on to h3 here. This looks absolutely diabolical. To lose h3 here looks it's totally gone. So we have bishop f1. This is very bad. Rook takes a2. Knight e4 threatening the nasty knight g3 check. And knight f2 check, of course, is now threatened. It's all over by the shouting, this position. Knight g3. c5, very desperate. That's taken. Check. The king steps back. Rook b1. Rook d2. Now king e3 again. Check. King e4. Check. Some nuisance checks. Now rook d4. Rook d1. So now with this pin, there's immediate knight e2 check threatened here using that pinned bishop on f1. So we have check, king coming in to e3, check, check, and Leela varies now with the knight coming to e4 now, shielding, bridge building. The bridge, rook takes e4 out of desperation. Here, if rook c2, then king g3 is super juicy. After, say, this, then there's check, and then mating. So, splat. So, we have rook takes e4. There's not really much to do here for white, except give up, basically. So, Leela just ignores this offer of a pawn, goes in for the kill with king g3 to be able to play f2, and then rook takes f1 if white dares to take on c5. In fact, sorry, okay, so b4, king f4, so the threat is king g3. So we have king f2, at least stopping king g3, but check drives the king back. King e3 now with the big threat of checkmate. Yes, that would actually be checkmate. Bishop b5. A takes is totally lost, and Leela doesn't spend too much time trolling this one after rook takes d3 and then checkmate here. So where did white go wrong in this game? It seems as though Leela's really the master of the pawn majority out of the opening here. The d5 hole being sealed gave black a kingside pawn majority. The threat of being really aggressive seemed to cause white to cause this light square triangle of pawns. The downside of that was the dark squares. Leela took out the dark square bishop, not minding what seemed to be some visual fragmentation. However, there were dark square entry points, especially for the black king. So the opening, really had some implications, actually, even deeply later, for dark squares being weak. With the king infiltrating and the rook pivoting into position via g3, getting to the 7th rank, that was really devastating. The biggest contrast of chess pieces in this game, I believe, was the king. That king was super aggressive. Leela is like Capablanca in endgames. Capablanca used to win games without too much risk by using really aggressive kings in the opening compared to the opponent's king and things like rook on the 7th. In fact, I gave a Quora answer recently on Capablanca. He had also had the lowest average centre pawn loss. Instead of wild speculation and stuff, it was just often technique wins with minimal risk. Here it did seem a bit like a Capablanca situation, this endgame. Pretty smooth, not too much risk, just positionally outplaying the mighty Fritz chess engine with the black pieces as well. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.